Good morning, everyone. My name is Michael Turner. I'm the Assistant Director of Grant and Loan Forgiveness Programs at New York State Higher Education Services Corporation, and I will be your guide today through what I typically call TAP 101, which is our basic TAP eligibility and certification overview. In the chat, you can enter your questions. Everyone is on mute, and you won't be able to unmute. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. This way we don't spoil the recording. The recording and a copy of the presentation will be posted in the training and webinars area of our financial aid administrators resources page. And I have put that link in the chat. So it's the very first link that you'll see right there. If you click on that link, you'll see that we have recordings of our Excelsior 101 training, our part-time TAP training we did recently, our consolidated scholarship training that we did last week. So all those recordings are up there. And you're welcome to relive the magic and wonder of those sessions at any time after this event. So I would expect that this particular session's recording would be up within the next 24 to 48 hours after we're done today. So we have a lot to cover. We'll get to it. And again, if you have questions, please punch them into the chat and we'll either address during the session or save that to the end. So let's talk about some basics around TAP and the application process, just to familiarize folks with the basic underlying understanding of what TAP is and how students are applying. So TAP awards typically range from a minimum of $1,000 to $5,665 per year. The $1,000 is the new recent minimum award increase, right, that we just had effective for the 24-25 academic year. Prior to 24-25, the minimum was $500, so $250 per semester. So that's been increased. But the actual amount that a student's going to receive is contingent upon a few factors. Obviously, their income, because TAP is an income-based award, and so the level of income that our applicants have is going to impact how much they receive. But also the first year that they started receiving TAP, if we're talking about an adult or continuing education student, the type of college that they're going to, whether it's a 2-year, 4-year college, the amount of tuition that they're being charged, and whether it's a non-degree or degree granting school. So there's all sorts of factors about a school's setup that could impact how much TAP a student receives. And what we'll talk about a little bit later, some impacts on the award amount is contingent on the dependency status of the student. Again, so income is primarily the factor that will dictate the most what the student's going to be receiving when it comes to calculating their award eligibility. And so when we're determining income eligibility, it's based on what we call New York State net taxable income, which for most people is line 37 of their IT 201. If we're an independent student, it would be the student's own tax return. If it's a dependent student, it would be the student and their parents' New York State tax returns that we're looking at. For the 25-26 AY, just like with FAFSA, it's going to be the 23 tax year that's going to be the determining tax year when it comes to 25-26 TAP eligibility. Right now, for the current year, it's 2022. The income limits range from $30,000 to $125,000, depending on the dependency status of a student and the category of independent student that we're looking at. It used to be a $10,000 income ceiling for students who are independent, who were single, didn't have any children, or tax dependents, and that's been increased to $30,000. As a result of the increase in both the maximum allowed income and that maximum for the independent students overall, we've seen a historic increase in the number of applications and TAP awards that we're giving in New York State, because there's a lot more eligible families with the $125,000 New York State net taxable income ceiling, but also more eligible independent students. Because in previous years, if you were an independent student who was single, you don't have children, if you made $20,000 working part-time under that old $10,000 income limit, you were not eligible for TAP. But now a lot of those students are eligible and they're getting awards. As with, and we'll explore this a little bit later, but as part of our application review, all income is subject to confirmation through our income verification program with the New York State Department of Tax and Finance. So again, here are our award ranges, and this is why the dependency status of the student is impactful when we talk about calculating TAP award eligibility, because you can see here the 56-65 maximum limit range goes to dependent students, independent students who have tax dependents, and then categories of independent students who are qualified as independent by way of being an orphan, ward of the court, or in foster care. There's a 35-25 maximum cap on the award amount for independent students who are single and have no tax dependents. And then for students who attend certain for-profit, non-degree private business schools, there's even larger caps on both the minimum and maximum award amounts, and these have been in place for a while and did not change with the new increases in cap limit. For those of you who represent a CUNY or SUNY four-year senior college, the students also are qualified to receive, in addition to their TAP award, something that's called the SUNY and CUNY tuition credit. Basically, in CUNY schools sometimes refer to this as a TAP waiver. It's basically an additional amount of funding that the state provides to help students close what we call the TAP gap, which is the difference between the maximum TAP award and the amount of tuition that they're being charged at these four-year senior colleges. So the promise of TAP has always been that if a student is, wholly eligible for TAP, they have very little income, they qualify for the maximum TAP award, that TAP should cover their full tuition at the senior colleges for SUNY and CUNY. And so the tuition credit or the TAP waiver is meant to help fill that gap so they can achieve that. Now, depending on the student's income eligibility, they may not qualify for the max award. And so the tuition credit is scaled down depending on how much of an award the students actually qualified for due to their income. It used to be that this was funded in combination between SUNY CUNY funds and New York State funds. Now it's fully funded for the last couple of years by New York State. So when we talk about applying for TAP, there's two different pathways that students take in order to get in an application with us. And so since the 2019-20 year, we've had this two different pathways that I call it. The first pathway is what I call the traditional pathway, which is where there's a FAFSA component, where students are FAFSA eligible by way of their citizenship immigration status. They file a FAFSA application, and then they complete what I call the traditional TAP application. Those students have to have a completed FAFSA process with an SAI calculated in order to have their TAP application processed. But there's an alternative pathway that came about in 2019-20 with the passing of the Senator Jose Peralta New York State DREAM Act legislation that opened up what I call the DREAM Act pathway for categories of students who are typically not eligible to file a FAFSA, but are now eligible to receive New York State student aid programs, including TAP. And so this pathway we designed is exclusively for this population of what we call dreamers, typically students who are either DACA, undocumented, or have categories of immigration statuses that are not decided, not eligible for federal student aid under the Title IV regulation. So if they're still eligible in New York State to apply for and potentially receive TAP, but the pathway that they have to go down through is the DREAM Act pathway. So when we're looking at our applicants, whether they're applying for the traditional pathway or they're applying through the DREAM Act pathway, there's certain requirements that are decided solely by HES. And where we have the processes in place to review and make determinations. And then we also are the final sort of decision maker on whether the students meet these qualifications. We're going to see in the latter half of this session, there's a whole set of eligibility requirements where schools are the primary decider of those eligibility criteria when we talk about academics, academic standing, full-time enrollment, stuff that you would only know at the school level. So at the state level, what we're reviewing in higher ed when we get an application are, things like the student's citizenship, immigration status, or eligibility under the DREAM Act, their New York State residency requirements or eligibility as a non-resident through the DREAM Act, which we'll talk a little bit about later, their dependency status, their income eligibility, and of course, lifetime limits, which are based on payment points, which is something we'll also cover today. So when we receive a traditional TAP application, a student has applied for FAFSA, they've submitted the traditional TAP application, we're not talking about the DREAM Act, we will piggyback off of the SSA citizenship verification status that comes through the ISA record with the appropriate comment codes that let us know whether we have a verified US citizen or a verified eligible non-citizen. If the student has submitted a FAFSA where there's comment codes on it that indicate that the student's status as a US citizen or eligible non-citizen could not be confirmed by the SSA, then in order to determine if the student is still eligible to apply through the traditional TAP application pathway, HES will also follow suit and ask for proof of US citizen or eligible non-citizen status in order to know if they're meeting the Title IV eligibility requirement and therefore meeting the eligibility requirements to apply through the traditional pathway. So we're seeing the same comment codes that you're seeing at the school level. So in a similar way, when you get an ISA record that has a common code indicating that SSA couldn't verify a student's status, you're requesting, proof of U.S. citizenship documents. You're requesting, passports, naturalization certificates, or other proof of eligible non-citizen status, permanent resident cards, I-94s, stuff like that. We're also looking at the same level. So if we collect documentation from a student that indicates to us that they're not eligible for Title IV-A, they're not eligible for the traditional pathway, then we'll message their application saying that they should look at the DREAM Act as a potential opportunity, given the wide variety of immigration statuses that are eligible under the DREAM Act. Now, when we've requested proof of citizenship documentation or any other kind of documentation from a student during our application review process, we wholly recommend that students utilize our document upload portal as the primary method of document transmission to get their, U.S. passports or whatever documentation we're asking for over to us and to enable us to review in a timely manner. So we have upload buttons within the students' portal. We also have we also have other ways of reaching the HES document upload portal. You can simply go on Google and Google HES document upload. And I'm going to punch that link into chat right now. So there's just different ways, the student can obviously get into their HES account and navigate to the area where there's a missing information message, and there'll be an accompanying button that says to upload their document. Or they could just simply go directly into our document upload portal, and they could then upload whatever information that we're requesting, whatever documents we're requesting. The schools do not have access to this. This is for security purposes. It's assigned, to pair to the student's HESC login. So the student themselves would have to log into their account on the document upload portal and then send their documents. That way we know, and it's coded to us, that it belongs to the student, and we know who to review it for. Right now, we do not offer any kind of document upload options for colleges to upload documents on behalf of students, but there are different ways that you could send us documentations on behalf of students. The most known one is our HES DocTrack email inbox and fax number, where you could send us documents that way if you want to send it on behalf of the student. So on the topic of citizenship, if we have a student who is, not eligible as a U.S. citizen or not qualified under the Title IV requirements as an eligible non-citizen, and again, for eligible non-citizen, we're following all the same Title IV requirements. So, we've gotten some questions recently about, schools have students from Ukraine who are under Ukrainian humanitarian parole. A few years ago, it was Afghan parole. If we get those I-94s, they're showing the student status is not expired, everything is good, it matches up to Ukraine UHP, it's good to go, then we're going to approve the traditional TAP application. They don't have to apply through the DREAM Act. It would only be that category of student who doesn't meet any pathway for Title IV eligibility that would want to explore the DREAM Act pathway. And so for the DREAM Act pathway, we're looking at students with statuses that include T or U visas, students who have temporary protected status because TPS is not an eligible Title IV citizenship status, DACA, which again is not an eligible Title IV status, or students who don't have a lawful immigration status, which could cover what most folks would qualify as an undocumented student, but also is a broader category of students who may have an undetermined immigration status. So right now we have, that influx of asylum seekers. They're applying for asylum, but their cases are not decided. So they're sort of in this gray area where we don't know if they're going to get asylum. We don't know if their asylum case is going to be declined. So we put them under this category as not having a lawful status, and they would have that pathway through the DREAM Act. But DREAM Act citizenship eligibility is not the only thing that we're looking at. So it's not just, am I an undocumented or DACA student? There's also an educational criteria component. So you have to have one of these three criteria at the bottom half of the screen met. So if I'm a DACA student, I also must be either a New York State graduate who graduated from New York State high school after attending 2 or more years of high school in New York State. If I am a New York State high school graduate who attended for 2 or more years, I must also enroll with an undergrad within 5 years of getting my diploma, or 10 years if it's a graduate program within getting my high school diploma. So there's a time limit. If I'm not a New York State high school graduate, but I am a New York State high school equivalency diploma recipient, I applied for my GED or TASC before it was GED, then it was TASC, now it's back to GED. If I got my equivalency in New York State, then I'm also eligible to apply under the DREAM Act again with one of those immigration statuses, but with the same 5-10 year limit for undergrad grad enrollment from when I got my equivalency. Or the last option would be for those who are attending SUNY and CUNY colleges, categories of students who are qualified to receive in-state tuition at SUNY or CUNY for reasons other than meeting the resident requirement. SUNY and CUNY has a bunch of different regulations. So, there's rules about, an undocumented student can't be considered a resident unless they have certain statuses, like they, have, applied for asylum, or, there's different categories that we've been looking at with CUNY and SUNY recently to see how broad it is. And there is a broad variety of students who typically meet this CUNY and SUNY in-state tuition requirements. So for us, one of these three paired with one of those immigration statuses, the student would be qualified to apply through the DREAM Act pathway. We also would be looking at their New York State residency. So whether they're a traditional applicant or a DREAM Act applicant, if they're a traditional applicant, we're looking to see, do they meet the traditional New York State residency requirement? And that requirement is that students, and if they're a dependent, their parents, must be New York State residents who have resided for 12 or more consecutive months prior to the term that the student is looking to receive their New York State aid for. So if a student just moved to New York over this summer, let's say they say they arrived in New York August 2024, then they wouldn't be eligible for the 24-25 year, but they could be eligible for the 25-26 year because they'll have their year by then, assuming that they live in New York State for 1 year. But again, if they're a dependent student, we're also looking at where their parents live. So if the student's parents live in New Jersey or live in another country, then their residency could disqualify the student as being in New York State resident because the parents themselves are not resident. Now, if there's questions about a student's residency eligibility, then the application is designed to do a residency screening based on the answers the student provides us, and it could generate what we call a residency review, and the student would be asked to submit the New York State residency questionnaire or affidavit, which would then ask them to give us a description and answer some questions around when they became a resident, how long they've been living in New York, their prior addresses, and we would use that information to determine if they meet this residency requirement under the traditional pathway. That's part of the online forms when they're going in, and if they're missing citizenship, they're missing residency, it's all baked into their online account. So the residency questionnaire is digitalized. They can log into their account, they can complete their residency questionnaire online and submit it to us as an electronic correction to their TAP form, and then we'll review it subsequently. If we determine we have a non-resident, or the student has indicated to us that they're not a New York State resident, because again, maybe their parent lives out of state, then they could be qualified through the New York State DREAM Act, because the New York State DREAM Act has a non-resident provision for students who are either one of those immigration statuses that we spoke about on the prior screen, undocumented, DACA, T, TPS, T or U visa, but it also extends to students who are US citizens or permanent residents. So if I'm a US citizen or permanent resident who, let's say I lived in New York all of my life, I graduated from New York high school, and then all of a sudden my parents decide to leave New York and go to Florida, and I'm staying in New York to continue my education to go to college, that student would be a candidate to apply as a non-New York resident as a US citizen, but through the DREAM Act. So they would indicate on the DREAM Act, we have a status that says I'm a US citizen whose permanent home is not in New York State. We also have the same thing for permanent residents. I'm a permanent resident whose home is not in New York State. So, and we have seen quite a number of folks starting to use this provision as it becomes known. So it impacts both students, obviously, if their parents are not living in the country, students whose parents have left the state. As long as the student meets the educational criteria of the DREAM Act that we spoke about on the prior screen, they could qualify as a non-resident, even though they wouldn't be seen as a resident through the traditional application process. Now, HESC is the ultimate decider of residency. Some of our schools will question a student's residency and tell us they think the student shouldn't be eligible. Again, if we reviewed the criteria or we made the determination that the student is a resident, then our determination holds. Schools can, of course, ask us to take a second look, see if there's, and let us know if there's conflicting information. But again, sometimes we'll have students where we're looking at their traditional application, they look like they're a non-resident, or a school will bring to our attention a student who's a non-resident, and we ask the school, is this student a New York State high school graduate who went to high school for 2 or more years. Because we just had one from a SUNY school. They're saying, oh yeah, the parents are leaving to Ohio or something like that. And we're looking and we can see on FAFSA everything the last few years, everything said they're a New York resident. They went to a New York high school. So we just simply asked the high school, send us the student's final. We asked the college, send us the student's final high school transcript showing that they meet that New York State high school graduate 2 or more years, and we'll just approve their residency questionnaire, even though they've indicated that their parent is not a New York resident, because again, the law says that you can be a non-resident if you have that 2 or more years of high school with high school graduation. So somebody asked on the topic of the DREAM Act, if a student has completed only 1 year of high school but lived in New York for 2 years, what would their status be? So again, they couldn't use the 2 or more years of high school. They are not applying as unless they go and go get one, a high school equivalency. So a lot of those students who fall into that 1 year category typically try to get the third option, which is when they go to SUNY and CUNY, they're applying under the in-state tuition eligibility criteria, showing that they meet one of the statuses where SUNY or CUNY would qualify them for in-state tuition, despite them not having the 2 or more years of high school. So that would typically be the third category to answer the question that came into chat. That's what some of those students are going for. And if we see, we're going to be implementing a new sort of screening process for this, but if we see that SUNY or CUNY has reviewed and approved them for in-state tuition, then under the DREAM Act regulations, they're eligible, even though they don't have the 2 years of high school. So again, we just kind of covered this. Would any of the criteria change for independent students? On the New York State residency, it would be solely on the student, right? So if the student is independent and they're being reviewed for residency, we're looking at the student themselves. Have they lived in New York State for 12 more months prior to the start of their term? It wouldn't factor in where their parents live. But when we get independent students who are filing residency questionnaires, we are looking for conflicting information. So one thing that we commonly see is we have independent students, they're, in their younger 20s, 23, 24, 25, and they file everything on the TAP app saying, oh, I don't live with my parents, they don't claim me, I'm on my own. We question residency, and then on the residency questionnaire, they say, yeah, I'm living with my parents. Well, in that case, we may we may approve their New York residency if we see that they and their parents are residents, but we may revoke the independent status that we've given them, because we're going to talk about independence here. You can't be living with your parent and file as an independent student under the age of 36. So that's going to be something coming up here. So that would be something that we'd scrutinize on a questionnaire if they say that their residency in New York is based on living with their parents. But they claim to be independent on the TAP application. That would be a conflict for us. So we just covered this, so I'll be brief here. So again, categories of students whose permanent home is outside of New York would include all of those students of the various immigration statuses we spoke about earlier, but also extends to US citizens and permanent residents who meet one of the educational criteria of the DREAM Act, graduated from the New York high school 2 or more years, have the high school equivalency diploma from New York State, or they're being charged in-state tuition for CUNY and SUNY schools. So again, just to reiterate the common question, how does somebody have a home outside of New York? Again, it's either the student themselves is residing out of state but meets the DREAM Act eligibility criteria, or the student lives in New York while they're going to college. Maybe they're staying with relatives, but their parents are the out-of-state resident. Somebody's asking, they had a student who came here senior year, mid-year, completed, and now have a US diploma, didn't leave here for a year. She was marked resident because she has a high school diploma. So again, we would have to look, that's kind of an isolated case. We'd have to look to see, did we question that student's residency? If they filed the TAP app and they said on the TAP app that they arrived here mid-senior year, so let's say they said December 2023, then when they filed the 24-25 TAP application in the spring, it should have flagged them for a residency review. Sometimes schools will bring up these examples to us. We'll pull up the student's app, and on their app, they just said they've been living here forever. They said they were a New York resident, however many years on the FAFSA. They said that they've lived in New York for more than a year on the TAP app, and it wasn't reviewed by us because we just went by what the student said on the app and what they signed off with the attestation under perjury law that they're giving us the right information. So again, so for Tina Marie's question, we'd have to look at that and review it. If this was a student who we determine is not a New York resident because of the short length of time, then maybe they could meet the non-resident criteria of the DREAM Act, but it wouldn't be for the 2 or more years of high school. It would have to have been one of the other criteria. You could have, as a non-resident, a student who literally shows up, in the summer, right before the fall semester starts, gets their New York State high school equivalency diploma, meets the non-resident requirements of the DREAM Act by way of getting a New York State high school equivalency diploma, and can start your program through the DREAM Act as a non-resident, because there's no duration of residency there, right? It doesn't say you have to live in New York for 1 year, then get your high school equivalency diploma. The DREAM Act legislation just says if you have your high school equivalency diploma and you're a US citizen, eligible non-citizen, or undocumented DACA, so on and so forth, you could be considered a non-resident through the DREAM Act. So that's how the law was written. So on the topic of dependency status, we have students who are considered automatically independent, which is remarkably different than the federal criteria. And this is something to keep in mind, because a lot of time when I'm answering questions that schools send to Priority Services or directly to me, there's a lot of confusion with how you learn the federal process and then learning how it works in New York State. So for federal purposes, a student is considered automatically independent regardless of their financial situation, living with parents, parents pay for everything, parents are millionaires. If the student is 24 years old or older, right? So they just look at date of birth. I'm 24 years old. My mom is Oprah, billionaire. Doesn't matter. I don't work. I don't have any income. I might get a full Pell Grant. For New York State, we're looking at financial independence. And for us, the automatic year of independence, where we won't ask if you still live with parents or financially depend on parents, is 36, not 24. So if we have a 36 or older student applying for TAP, we're going to automatically bring them through the process as independent, regardless of how they answer questions about living with or depending on parents. For students that are younger than 36, the application does a financial independence test, so to speak, to look at, does this younger than 36-year-old live with their parents? Do they still, depend financially on their parents by parents providing them money? Do they still get claimed as a dependent on their parent tax returns? And so if we have students from the age range of 22 to 35 who indicate to us that they're not living with their parents, they're not financially dependent on them, they're not claimed on taxes by them, then we will grant financial independence status, FIS, to those students. The only exception, though, is students that are younger than 22, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is sort of the questions that we present the student. So if I'm 25 years old and I say, yes, I live with my parents for more than 6 weeks in the prior year or in this year, then we're going to say you need to provide parent information. So that's why a lot of times we get questions from schools. Oh, we have this 26-year-old and they're independent on FAFSA. Why is TAP asking for parent info? And then we'll respond and say, well, the student says they're still living with their parent. And by New York State law, the requirements say that if you're still living with your parents, you're 26 years old, you need to provide parent info and income on the TAP app. Now, if I claim no to all these questions, I don't live with my parents, they don't claim me, they don't provide me any money, but I'm younger than 22, let's say I'm a 17, 18, 19-year-old student, then those students must have an accompanying special circumstance as to why at that younger age, they're claiming to be financially independent from their parents and on their own. So this is kind of similar to what you would have on the federal side when the student's younger than 24 and they make a claim of independence. There's certain special circumstances that student has to fall under in order to be qualified as independent. And if not, they have to provide parent info to complete their FAFSA. So for TAP, it's a similar process, but our age is under 22. So a 19-year-old says, I don't live with my parents, they don't provide for me, so on and so forth. They have to have one of these 4 special conditions. Parents that are totally permanently disabled, being a foster youth, ward of the court, or orphan on or after age 13, receiving public assistance under their own budget, public assistance not including food stamps, unemployment insurance. We also do not count WIC or the AFDC program. So when we're looking at public assistance, we're looking at cash assistance, housing assistance under their own budget, not under a parent's budget. And then our more broader category is what we call an involuntary dissolution of family. So that's basically all your other special circumstances as to why I'm not living with my parents anymore, not dependent on my parents anymore. So that could be your parent or your student whose parent died and they don't have a relationship or support from the surviving parent. That could be your student whose parents kicked them out of the house, homeless unaccompanied students. It covers a broad variety of circumstances. So whenever a student indicates to us that they have one of these special conditions, their application will be processed, but it'll have a request for supporting documentation. So we want, just like on the federal side, they make a claim of having special circumstances, you're going to be looking at documentation that would support that. We're looking at the same thing and collecting it for state aid purposes. Our document requirements, though, could be a little bit more stringent than colleges. So just to, tie a bow around this topic, we have colleges that forward us what they used, and we're seeing like letters that were handwritten, not signed by relatives. So we require notarized statements signed by the person making the statement. So that way we know that the student didn't just jot up a letter, put someone's name on it, and then give it to us. It has to be notarized by the person who's making a notarized sworn statement by the person who's making that statement. If it's a third-party letter from, a high school or school district or a social worker, has to be on their letterhead. So we're always kind of looking and scrutinizing documentation to make sure that we have a pretty rigorous standard of what we're accepting. Schools, federal government gives you a little bit more, freedom in terms of what you're accepting and collecting. So sometimes what we get from a college as proof of independence, we're sending back to you saying it doesn't meet our document standards. So just be mindful of that we do have pretty strict document standards. I've been seeing a lot of these foreign notarized guardianship statements. They're not even from courts. They're just from some notary in another country. Parents sign it saying that their child is under the guardianship of a relative who lives in the US. Student's been living in the US all of this time. And, that by rule, if I live in New York, my guardianship papers need to come from a New York State court. Can't come from an out-of-state or third party or another country. And it can't, of course, be a notarized letter signed by just the parents. So we just want to make sure that the documents meet our standards when we're sending us proof of independence for students. So income verification, another area that we have full decision-making power on, and we have a rigorous process with the New York State Department of Tax and Finance. And so what happens is the students will fill out the application. And so no surprise for anybody who works in financial aid, a lot of our applicants indicate that their income is zero. Their parents made zero, student made zero. And now, I like the new FAFSA because with the IRS involuntary, I call it retrieval, you could see if people really made zero or not because they're just pulling their taxes from the IRS. So we can see that conflict. But regardless of what they report on the TAP app, we're going to send the student and parent information over in a file to the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance. And they will confirm for us what they have on the tax records for the student and for the parent for the 22 tax year, which is for the year going on right now. For the year coming up, 25-26, is going to be the 23 tax returns. So the process will verify for us what that income really is. And if it's more than zero, it'll change that initial award estimate, which was based on the student saying it was zero, to perhaps a lower award estimate. And it could work vice versa. Sometimes we have students who provide us a higher income amount than it actually was, and we get a lower taxable income amount from tax and finance, resulting in an increase in the award. So we run these processes multiple times throughout the week. We have different types of income verification cycles. We have cycles that bring people in who haven't gone through the cycle yet. We have cycles that reprocess people, try to bring them back through if they failed before. We have cycles that look for people who claim to have too high income and they're denied, but we're looking to verify that that high income is really true. And we have reprocessing cycles that will run everybody back through the process, even though they've previously been verified, to see if there are any updated income figures from tax and finance. And that reprocess cycle, while it doesn't result in whole-scale changes, there are times where initially a parent will come up that they don't have any taxes on file, and we give them an award, and then 3 months later, we send them back through this reprocessing cycle, and then tax and finance says, oh yeah, the parent did recently file. And there's a updated income amount for that parent, and it ends up resulting in an award being decreased. So students and parents agree to the income verification process as part of our affirmation. why we have the parent signature page and why we have the student sign off. So they do agree to this process that we will be reviewing and re-reviewing income with tax and finance. Now, if the process fails and they are not matched, there's no record that indicates that student or parent filed, we send an email notification to the student, basically letting them know that the process has failed. And the guidance that we provide is that they should first check their application to see if there are any errors. 9 out of 10 IVP failures are just the result of incorrect information on the application. Wrong social security numbers for the parent, different last names provided for the parent than what the parent is currently using to file taxes. Sometimes for the student, for independent students, their name doesn't match with taxes because they're put one name on their FAFSA or their social security card, and FAFSA is filed under one name, but when they do taxes, they do a different name. Some people recently get married and then they file with a new married last name. Tax and finance is picking up on the most recent info they have for that student or parent. So if somebody recently filed their taxes under a different name, then all their prior tax years have to be matched under that new name because that's what their record now is based under that new name. So first, the first line of correction or, to troubleshoot and resolve an income verification failure is simply just advising the student to log back into your TAP application, review all the information you provided. Did you give a right tax filing status for yourself and your parents? Sometimes students will say they filed when they didn't file. Sometimes students will say they filed and they repeat their parents' taxable income as their income, causing them to either be denied for an award or get a really low award. So again, the student just taking the initiative and going in and re-reviewing their answers, they might find out, oops, I actually did I filed taxes and I put my parent, We see all sorts of very silly errors. I've seen students marry themselves to their parents. They say they're married, they put their parent as their spouse. So just, sort of careless errors that can cause problems with income verification. Now, if they've gone through it and everything is correct and everything matches their most recent filing, then we will typically ask for tax transcripts or a certified copy of the New York State tax return. So we do not accept personal copies of tax returns to verify income. There might be other instances where we ask for a personal copy of a tax return where post-verification, we need to make an adjustment, such as an income adjustment based on the death of a parent or something of that nature, where we'll accept a personal copy, but this is only for those who have already cleared verification where we have verified income on record. For a non-verified application where we don't have a verified income for that student or parent, we want proof that this is their actual income. So IRS transcripts or certified copies of the New York State tax return, where it comes with a cover letter from the New York State Tax and Finance showing that this is what they got on file for them. Typically, if they could get a certified copy of their tax return, we should be matching them to income verification. So again, a lot of times we get tax transcripts, we get tax returns, and we could simply see that the issue is not that we need a tax return. The issue is that parent last name is wrong, parent social is wrong. So please do not make it the first line of, oh, you're not meeting matching IVP, send your taxes. It should be, you're not meeting IVP. Have you looked at your application? Have you fixed it? Does it match your parents' taxes? And then if that's not the case, and then the second line of correction would be, all right, maybe you need to send some transcripts so they can resolve this. Schools can review their students who are being held up from advancing onto a roster, because in order to make it onto a roster, they have to clear income verification. So if you'd like to know, who those students are that are being held up for being placed on a 24-25 roster, you can look in your customized reports area on HESWeb and you can run your pending income verification report. This is for schools to troubleshoot. Please do not print the report, copy all the students, put it in the email to Priority Services and say, why aren't these students completing income verification? Because you will not get a reply to that email. So we do not have the time to review all of your students to tell you why they're not clearing income verification. It's a tool that we built for schools so you can work with your students to try to figure out the issue. And we just explain what those potential issues can be. And a lot of times a simple review of the TAP app and a correction will resolve the problem. We get questions from schools commonly about adjustments to incomes. Can students request sort of an appeal to get their income decreased based on special circumstances? The answer is yes, but we only accept the circumstances on this screen here. So divorce or legal separation of parents, or the student being divorced or legally separated from their spouse, death of a wage earning parent or the student's spouse, total permanent disability of a wage earning parent, student, or their spouse. So those are the three categories of special circumstance where we will ask for documentation and we will adjust income. We do not adjust income for for reasons of I got a new job, I'm making less money, or I received a lot of unemployment benefits back in that tax year. That's why my income was inflated. I sold a property, I sold stocks. There's all these kind of different reasons why there would be some kind of one-time income increase. For those situations, we do not adjust income. The applicant would just be told that you need to reapply in a future tax year when your tax year is eligible for for our programs. So it's only these three categories. So again, if you're a school and you're doing a professional judgment for loss of employment, you could do that on the federal side, but it's not going to do anything on the state side. We're not going to accept that documentation or do that review. So that's just to reiterate what I just said here. Business losses, we get questions, oh, I just retired, I'm on a different income. Again, in future tax years, you could become eligible, but for the current year, if your 22 tax return says you're not eligible, you're not eligible. So HESC will also monitor lifetime usage. And this is something, again, that HESC has sole discretion on and that we're deciding based on our history of how many TAP awards a student has received in the past and whether they're full-time or part-time payments. And so we use a point system that helps us account for how long a student has received TAP, and there's certain caps on the maximum lifetime usage. So for us, every time they receive a full-time semester award, it's 6 payment points that the student's using. Trimester quarter awards are 4 payments, and then those points may be prorated depending on part-time usage. So if a student is in a traditional semester-based program, and for the fall semester they go half-time and they get part-time TAP for 6 credits, then it would be a 3 payment point usage for that particular term. What we do is we're keeping track of how all these points add up over time. So if once we reach a certain level of point consumption, we know that the student has met their lifetime limits for the program. So for students pursuing 2-year degree programs, such as an associate's program, it's a cap of 36 lifetime point usage, which would typically be 6 full-time semesters. So if a student goes to a community college, they take 6 full-time semesters, 3 full years to graduate, then they'll have used their 2-year eligibility. Now, if they need to go a 4th year, they're going to run out of points and they're not going to have a 4th year. Bachelor's, 4-year programs have a 48-point cap, so this would be 8 full-time semesters, but usage for the associates or the 2-year degree counts against remaining lifetime usage for the 4-year degree. So again, if I take 3 years to get my associates at my community college and then I transfer to my 4-year college, I'm only going to have 1 year, 12 points of eligibility left to get TAP at my 4-year program, even though it might take me more than a year to complete that degree. I might have to go 1 or 2 or 3 years to complete that degree, especially if I change majors. So the points don't get rolled back. So if they use all of it for a lot of it for their 2-year degree, it's really going to limit them for how much they have left for their 4-year. Students who are in a school's approved 5-year degree program, so we're talking about 5-year undergraduate degrees where the student, is in, let's say, an accounting or architecture undergrad degree program that requires 5 years, 150 or more credits to graduate, that would be something that would make the student eligible for an additional year. Or for schools that have an approved opportunity program, students are also able to get an extra year. So for those 2-year schools that have approved opportunity programs, students can get, can go beyond 36 points. They can get that additional year. For the 4-year schools, they can get up to 60 points, right, to get that additional year if they're in the 5-year program or if they're in the opportunity program. That's something that you have to flag with us on our system, and we'll talk about where to flag that. Somebody asked a question, how do students initiate the process of an income appeal if they have special circumstances? So typically our application will screen for it if they tell us that on the app that a parent has recently passed away or that their parents recently became divorced or separated. The application will put them in a missing information request for the documentation needed for the appeal. If they didn't indicate it on the app or it didn't initiate a request automatically based on the info they reported, For example, we get people that say they were divorced since 2020, but they're still filing their taxes as married, and now they're asking us for an adjustment because they're saying they really divorced or separated. Why are they still filing jointly? Who knows? Then they'd have to set a call appointment with us for us to review the situation with them, and then we would advise them where to send their documentation. They also have the upload area, right? I put that in chat. So they can upload a letter to us with their documentation, and that would be another way that they can initiate it with us. So let's talk about milestones here. So a student has cleared HESC edits. We're okay with citizenship, we're okay with residency, income, so on and so forth, and we've approved them or denied them based on our processing results. The processing results of their application is going to land on a report that we call the student status list. So this is a weekly report that we tell schools, we give you the dates every week on our TAP processing schedule in our financial aid administrators area of our site. And this report will give you the statuses of students right now who've gone through the application process. They've gone through and they were denied. They've gone through and they are missing information, residency, whatever, they'll be flagged as having an applicant missing info on the status list. They've gone through, they were approved, and they've cleared income verification. They will be on the status list. The only category of students that will not be on a status list, well, two categories, obviously those who haven't applied, or those who are approved but have not cleared income verification, because we don't want schools to expect to receive an award that's been approved but has not been verified, where we don't know what the final award amount is going to be. So we do not report approved, non-verified, non-income verified awards on the status list. Now, the status list is available for download only through our web file transfer portal. So for those of you who have access to our HESC web transaction processing, that's when you come in. If you have web file transfer access, you'll see a link for web file transfer on that main menu. And then you could download these files either as flat files to import into your system, or you could request them converted to an Excel file. I think it comes back as a CSV file in the web file transfer portal. So I really recommend that you look at your status list. We have the full and comprehensive list. Gives you an idea of where all your students are at, and it's a really usable report. So you can see, do we have a bunch of students missing info we need to reach out to, stuff like that. We do have other customized reports we'll talk about later. Now, in order for students to land on any of our reports, we must have a fully processed app. Obviously, that, if the student's in a skeleton status, there's no app on file, then there's nothing for us to report. If they're approved, they have to go through income verification. And very importantly, we must have a student ID number assigned for them on our system. So a few years back, we stopped sharing social security numbers as a basis for reporting student data, which helps us protect social security numbers in file exchanges. And so we go primarily exchanging student data with schools by student ID number. So the ID number that you've assigned them at your school. But we need to know what that ID number is. So you might have 20 approved students who are not on a status list, not on our roster, because right now we don't have an ID number assigned for them. Now, we do send out our student college ID request file, which comes through web file transfer, gives you a full list of students who have an app on file with your code listed, who don't have a ID assigned. So you do want to pull up that student ID record on web file transfer and see who's missing IDs. And then you can either add them manually on HESC Web. There's a function called student ID maintenance, or you could send us a response file with the IDs, and the file, will just reduce as the more students you give us IDs for. When the file is produced the next time, it has less students that are missing IDs. So we really want to make sure schools are up to date. A lot of the inquiries we get from students who say to us, "Oh, my college hasn't given me my TAP yet." A lot of times it's a missing student ID. So we'll ask the student to give us their ID number if they have it. Sometimes we're reaching out to colleges and saying, "What's the student's ID number?" It's not assigned, but really, if you want to make sure that you're getting all your funding and that students are being properly and awarded timely, that you're also timely providing us their ID numbers. So again, we do publish the dates of all of our sort of reporting milestones, including the status list, on our TAP processing schedule, which is on the general hesc.ny.gov webpage under the academic partners and financial aid professionals link. So let's shift gears from what HESC is reviewing to what schools should be reviewing when things reach the school for school certification. And so there's a number of items that you need to review. What happens is when we've reported students as eligible and they're placed on what we call a payment roster, schools will then have to perform school certification to tell us if they meet all of the various eligibility requirements that need to be reviewed at a school level. And a lot of these are academic-based requirements. And so what you're doing is you're conducting that review and you're submitting a transaction to us, whether in batch or individually on HESWeb, to tell us whether or not the student meets those requirements for us to be able to initiate payment. So when does the certification process typically begin? Well, when the student reaches the milestone of being placed on a payment roster. If a student is not yet on a payment roster, then you can't certify them. So the first step in certifying students is asking, is this student on a payment roster? And if they're not, you could look at the dates on our TAP processing schedule will tell you when the rosters came out. A lot of times I get questions in priority services. Somebody's like, oh, a student not on the November roster. November roster came out November 6th. The student's app was approved on November 7th. They missed the date. They're going to be on the December roster. And that schedule will be released at the end of this month. So they have to meet the criteria and be eligible for roster placement on or before the roster date that we publish on the site. Rosters are released in the evening. That way we can try to capture as many students as possible throughout the day, and then we can get them on that roster that evening. So when they're on the roster, you're going to be looking for students, obviously approved, they have positive award amounts, they've gone through IVP, and we have their student ID number. All those factors would lead to them being on a roster. If a student is approved, has an ID, but not on a roster, then your problem is probably income verification. You want to look at our site to see is income verified, because that could be why they haven't reached the roster milestone yet. Now, rosters are available through batch. If you go through web file transfer, you pull up the 8069 reports, or you can also go through our standard reports area on HESWeb, and you can pull up the paper versions, the PDF versions of the rosters. You could also just go to the View Submit Certification area on HESWeb, and that's where you can pull up your full electronic rosters and look at everybody who needs to be certified. And so when you're conducting your certification process, there's typically 3 statuses of a student. We'll describe it if the student's contacting us saying, well, what's my status? We can say you've been certified. Your college has processed your award. They certified you as eligible, and a payment has been issued or already is being held by your college. Or we can say you've been decertified by your school. Your school has indicated to us that you do not meet the criteria to receive an award. Or we could tell a student that you're on a roster, you haven't been certified yet, you're pending certification. Now, when students are pending certification, for us, especially this point in the fall, a lot of students should be certified for those schools who have traditional calendars. We're not talking about schools that might have approved session-based micro-term type structures where you do have to wait a little bit later to certify. But generally, if you're a traditional semester school, we'll talk about the certification status date, but typically by this time of year, your students should be certified if they've been on rosters. So a lot of times if we have students who are pending certification with roster dates dating back to summer, we're telling them that you have to contact your college to see why they haven't certified you yet. So when can schools actually start submitting certifications to us? We call it the certification status dates. It's when students have reached 100% tuition liability for the term. So if they were to withdraw from all their classes, stop attending, they're at the point where you would bill 100% tuition liability. So a lot of schools have that sort of tuition refund schedule where you might do 25% the first week, 50% the second week, so on and so forth. It's at the point where you're at or beyond the 100% liability threshold that you would now start certifying your students. If you're a school that has approved SED, New York State Education Department has approved you to have a modular-based term structure, then you wouldn't be able to certify until they're 100% tuition liable for their enrollment across all of those modules. So let's say you run, a traditional 15-week semester, but it's chopped up into 3, 7, 5-week terms. And so it would be at the, commencement or at the point for the 3rd module where they're liable for all of that enrollment across all 3 modules that you would then initiate the certification process. Why? Because if the student were to drop their enrollment for that 3rd module and not be, charged tuition, not have liability, they don't have enough course length. They need to have 15 weeks in order to be eligible for TAP. So they wouldn't even be eligible to get state aid in that case. So what are schools reviewing typically as part of the certification review? So there's a number of things, a lot, again, related to academic eligibility. The first of which is ability to benefit, which we'll expand a little bit more, but does the student have a U.S. high school diploma or what the state deems as a recognizable equivalent? Do they meet the full-time status requirement, which 12 or more credits and the degree applicable coursework? If they are not full-time, do they meet the part-time TAP eligibility criteria? We're not going to dive too much into part-time TAP. There's a whole session, an hour that we did on part-time TAP in the training section of our webpage. Again, the link is at the very top of the chat. Accelerated study, again, that was also spoken about in the part-time TAP webinar, but we'll talk about it a little bit here as well, just a brief overview. Declaration of major, because of course, how can you know if courses are applicable for full or part-time enrollment if they're not in the declared major? So we'll talk about that. Good academic standing, which we call our SAP and POP requirement review. Duplicative benefits. Are students receiving other tuition-specific grant or scholarship programs or benefits that are reducing their tuition liability, therefore reducing their TAP eligibility, because TAP is only paying toward tuition? And then 5-year status, which we spoke about a little bit earlier, which is granting the student the ability to receive that additional year of TAP if they're in the opportunity program or in an approved 5-year degree program. So let's talk about ATB, ability to benefit. State law says that in order for students to meet ability to benefit to receive New York State student aid programs like TAP or scholarship for academic excellence, generally students must have a U.S. high school diploma or the recognized equivalent. And the state has specific guidelines as to what is the recognized equivalent. Recognized equivalent is recognized by New York State, not recognized by some third-party company like West or Globe who evaluates a student's foreign degree high school diploma is equivalent to a U.S. one. That doesn't matter for the state. The state doesn't say we empower third-party companies to say that a student has credentials meet ability to benefit. That third-party evaluation means nothing to New York State. So what does New York State says? Does that student have a U.S. high school diploma? If no, let's say they're a foreign high school graduate, then they have to have a recognized equivalent. What could that be? Well, that could be a high school equivalency diploma where they've taken and passed the GED in New York State, or they've met this college credit criteria, 24 core college credits to get a New York State high school equivalency diploma. That's another avenue for getting a high school equivalency diploma in New York State. And SCD has that information on their site. Or they hold a prior college degree, so student has an associate's or bachelor's. It could be foreign or domestic, but if it's foreign, you got to make sure that it's legit and that college is authorized by their country's Ministry of Education to confer degrees in that country. But if they do have a prior college degree, then yeah, they meet the ability to benefit requirement. Or the third option would be taking and passing an ability to benefit test if your school has an approved ability to benefit test process in place, certified on paper with the New York State Education Department. There is an annual certification, recertification process for a school's ability to benefit. It's not something between HESC and schools, it's between schools and the New York State Education Department. So you want to make sure that if you do offer this testing, that you do have that reauthorized every year. They know your tests you administer, they know what your passing scores are. Now, if you're a school that does not offer ATB examinations, then you can't tell a student, oh, go take an ATB test, because there's nowhere they're going to be able to take it. So, if you're going to tell a student that they need to do ATB testing, you should have that process in place, again, approved by the New York State Education Department. Can ATB be satisfied if the student has the core 24 college credits without submitting it to SCD? SCD says yes, it can, as long as you've done the review and you believe that they will be conferred the diploma. Because I'm more paranoid, would still have the student apply for it. So I would, even though I know that I look at their transcripts and they're going to have the 24 credits as laid out by SED, I would still tell the student, here's the application. I think it's like $10, apply for this and get this in. And then you've done your due diligence to say that you told the student to make sure that they applied for it. But I would, I'm a little bit more paranoid. I'd say, I'm going to let you get TAP, but you better bring this back to me or else. Um, so one last note on ATB, DREAM Act applicants are subject to the same requirements. So a student who's coming through as DACA undocumented, if they have a foreign high school diploma, they need to meet the ATB requirements that are on the screen. So they may have to take an ATB examination. They may have to go and get a high school equivalency because they have foreign high school. So keep that in mind. Just because we approve them for TAP through the DREAM Act doesn't mean they meet ATB. Just because we approve somebody for TAP in general doesn't mean they meet ATB. We don't screen for ability to benefit as part of TAP eligibility when we get an app. That's something that schools are screening for during admissions. So just be mindful of that. Full-time status. So this is, where you're seeing if the students, the state requirement says they have to be in 12 or more credits, but not any just 12 or more credits. It has to be 12 or more credits that are applicable to the degree program that they're seeking at your school. So somebody asked if their school doesn't offer ATB testing, can they accept ATB scores at a prior institution? Yes, you're not going to, you can't obviously scrutinize the passing scores, but if the student met the ATB requirements at their prior institution, then typically the burden is not on your institution to reinstitute the ATB and to have them take another exam. The burden would be on the prior institution if they were audited to prove that the student met the requirements at the time. So it's not your responsibility at that point to screen for that. So for full-time study, the student needs to have 12 or more credits that are degree applicable. If it's your clock hour program, it's 24 clock hours, instructional clock hours. Now, degree applicable means courses that are required for gen ed requirements, primary major, free elective requirements as dictated by the degree program or the degree track. Courses that are determined to be not integral to that degree track are not to be counted towards meeting full or part-time status. So what could those courses be? Well, let's say students are taking minor courses. A minor, unless your school requires a minor for degree completion or for major completion, minor courses don't count unless they somehow can be folded into a gen ed primary major free elective requirement for the primary degree track. Same thing for second majors. If you don't require a student to have 2 majors to complete their degree program at your school, then courses that are for the second major that cannot be folded into gen ed primary major or free elective requirements are not seen as integral. Now, if the student's in a dual degree program, a BA, BS, where they have to take 2 disciplines to complete that specific degree program, then yes, they could have to hold the 2 majors. But in general, for TAP, it's program of study, and they have to have a primary program of study, and that's where you're doing all of this assessment to make sure that what they're taking meets the program of study. So in order to know whether the student's meeting full-time status, obviously major declaration is going to be important. We know that students will come in undecided. So it's based on how many years they are in their program as to when the requirement kicks in for them to have declared a major. So for 2-year degree programs, the state requirement is that they must declare a major no later than 30 days of the add drop of the first term of their second year. For 4-year programs, it's within the 30 days of add drop for their third year, junior year of the program. Some schools have more stringent major declaration requirements. You may require them to declare right away, depending on what programs your school offers. You may require them to declare in the first year or a second year of the 4-year program. If yours is stricter than this, then this might not be a concern for you. Where it becomes a concern typically is with transfer students. So transfer students might be coming in already beyond these 2 or 3 years of study, where they might need to declare right away in order for you to know how to track them in their program. So just be mindful of that for students who are continuing students. They might already be coming in at a level where they need to have declared as soon as possible in order for you to make that assessment of their full-time status or part-time status. Remedial coursework can count toward full or part-time enrollment. For full-time enrollment, it's an equivalent of 9 remedial hours or credits, non-credit remedial courses that can be counted, but they must have at least 1 3-credit actual credit-bearing course, right? So if a student's in their very first semester at your school, they test as needing remedial, they're taking 9 equivalent credits of remedial coursework, they need to have that 1 3-credit actual credit-bearing course. to be 12 credits, and they're good to go. After the first semester, it's 6 and 6. 6 of the remedial equivalent credits, and then 6 of actual credit-bearing courses. There is a final year leniency to the full-time rule. This does not apply to part-time or part-time TAP. This is a full-time leniency. So can we qualify a student as being full-time in their final year of study for our 2 or 4 year degree program? What it says is in the semester before their final semester, so second to last semester, students can be enrolled in at least 6 credits of required coursework, and then can have the other 6 credits or additional credits in whatever they want in non-required coursework to reach 12 credits to receive a full-time TAP award. In their final semester of study, it needs to be just 1 required course of any credit amount. It could be a 1 credit thesis, it could be a 1 credit lecture, and then the other 11 credits can be whatever they want. And by whatever they want, literally means whatever they want. If they want to take a bunch of repeat courses that they don't need to repeat, that falls under the umbrella of whatever they want. They want to take a bunch of non-required courses, again, in a different major, secondary major, or a minor, that falls within the whatever they want umbrella. But they have to be in this semester before the final or final semester, and only 1 final semester is allowed. So if the student is in that 1 last course in their final semester and they flunk that course or withdraw from that course, then you're immediately going to decertify them in the following term as not being in good academic standing. So they can't be granted this leniency multiple times in the same school, same program. For repeated coursework, repeated courses are very easy. Can we count a repeated course towards full or part-time enrollment? And the question with a repeated course is, does the student need to repeat this course? And if the answer is yes, they do need to repeat it, then it could be counted. If the answer is no, they do not need to repeat it, then it doesn't get counted, again, unless it's the final year leniency. So when we say, does it need to be repeated, we're saying, well, did they get a failing or grade, or didn't they not complete credit in that course, and the course is required for their degree program? Then yes, they need to repeat it. Did they get a lower unsatisfactory grade where the course requirements or the degree program requirements require them to have a better grade in order to advance in that degree track? So maybe they're a pre-med or whatever, their science major, and you need to have a B or better in bio in order to advance in the major, and they got a C in bio. Well, then yes, they need to repeat it, and they can repeat that bio course, and you can count it toward full-time enrollment. So always ask that question when you see repeat coursework. Well, 2 questions. The first is, does it need to be repeated? And the second is this the student's final year of study, where we could just not even worry about it within the leniency. There's a new regulation that came over this summer from SCD about full-time status waivers that would not fall within the final year leniency. This would fall within the earlier years of the student's study at your school. And it has to do with students who are quote unquote high achieving students who are coming in with large numbers of previously earned credits, whether it's banked pre-college credit or transfer credits, that will cause the student to either have to declare a major right away or follow a degree track right away, or not allow them to complete their degree track, in a natural course due to all of the excessive credits. So for example, all of their elective credits for the major are all filled up because of all of these transfer credits that you couldn't really apply toward the major, but all filled in all their electives. So what SCD said in this new regulation is that full-time status waivers can be granted to these students who are quote unquote designated high achievers, to allow them to take coursework that would not typically be seen as degree applicable, based on having all of this extra credit and all these credits slotted into their degree track, to allow them to still progress in their program, or to take the courses that are needed in sequencing, however it negatively impacts the student, so that you could determine them as being full-time status. So again, these are circumstances out of the student's control, meaning that they were just an eager high school student, took a bunch of pre-college credits, or they transferred in a bunch of credits and they're just all being slotted in again to electives, not allowing the student to take any electives at your school. Multiple waivers are allowed. This amendment became effective summer of 24, June 26th. If you have questions about the policy, this is not a HES policy, this is a New York State education policy, please send those questions to kiap@nisa.gov. They are compiling questions, so that's why it's good that you ask them directly. And they said that they're at some point going to put up like a Q&A document on this particular topic. But we did put a bulletin about this on our site as well. So let's talk about good academic standing. So when we're reviewing students for good academic standing, this is typically our continuing TAP recipients that we're looking at, and we're looking at two components of seeing if they're in good standing. Looking at pursuit of program, or POP, and we're looking at satisfactory academic progress, or SAP. So for pursuit of program, it's a measure of effort. Are students completing courses from start to finish? Not necessarily are they passing the course, but are they sitting in the course start to finish? And satisfactory academic progress is more of a quantitative measurement of how many credits do they have at this point, what's their cumulative GPA, and how does that allow them to progress to receive their next TAP payment. So program pursuit is fairly straightforward. Again, did a student complete a course from start to finish? Not did they pass it, but did they complete it? So courses, grades A through F, as long as they indicate the student sat through the entire course, would be considered meeting pursuit. But grades that indicate they didn't complete the course from start to finish, like withdrawals or non-attendance type of grading, would not count towards meeting program pursuit. Now, the way it's measured is there's a requirement for each year they're receiving TAP. In their first year receiving TAP, there's a 50% pursuit threshold. So meaning if they're a full-time student, incomplete grades would not meet pursuit right away. So somebody asked about incomplete grades. But what we would suggest in that point is that you won't just hold off on evaluating good academic standing until the incomplete grade is decided. So you don't know if that's going to, if your policies say they don't hand in the coursework, it turns into a W, WF or something like that, then it would not count for pursuit. But if they complete the coursework, they get a grade, then that does count. So you may want to wait. I would say you have incomplete information to make an assessment for pursuit until those incomplete grades are decided. So you'd have to hold off. In their first year receiving TAP, 50%. So again, we base this on the core 12 credits of full-time enrollment, right? To be a full-time TAP recipient, you need 12 degree applicable credits. So 50% of 12 credits is 6 credits. So they need to pursue at least 6 of 12 credits, again, finishing the course, starting the course, finishing it, in order to meet pursuit. So let's say they're a first-year TAP recipient right out of high school at your college, and their first semester is a tough one for them. They do 2 C's and 2 W's. They were taking, 4 3-credit classes. That would meet the 50% threshold for pursuit. So that student would be fine in their next semester to get TAP because they did the 50%. But if this was a second-year student who's at the 75%, then withdrawing from 2 out of 4 courses would negatively impact this because they need to have 9 out of 12 credits satisfactorily, fully pursued, in order to meet that second-year requirement. In the third and the fourth year, they need to pursue the full 12 credits. So if you have a fourth-year senior who's enrolled for just 12 credits, again, 4 3-credit classes, and they withdraw from one of those courses, they're not in good academic standing in the next semester. So, right away, there's no leniency for that student because they're already in their third or fourth year. Now, again, this is a retroactive evaluation. So some schools get confused. And they say, well, the student is a sophomore, and we're looking back at their freshman year, and they did the 2 C's and 2 W's sort of deal. So they're not in good standing, right? And we say, no, they're fine. And the school says, but they're at the 75% threshold. Not in their first year they were. So we're looking at what was their requirement at the time they took the courses. And if they were in their second semester of their first year receiving TAP, they're under the 50% threshold. They only needed to pursue 50%. Now they're in their second year, so at the end of this fall, they need to meet the 75% for this fall's grades, this fall's coursework, not for freshman year. So keep that in mind. It's a retroactive look. Where were they? What was their pursuit requirement for that prior semester that we're evaluating pursuit for? SAP is another straightforward. We're looking at how many payments a student has received, and there's going to be literal GPA, cumulative GPA requirements and credit progression requirements for the student. And so we provide SAP charts to schools that will help, sort of designate what those requirements are as the students are advancing in their program, advancing and receiving TAP. So I just punched into chat the links to our SAP FAQs where it has a link to the charts. And so we're going to talk about what those charts are. And this is a 4-year degree program, a baccalaureate degree program. And this is the SAP chart for students who are first receiving TAP in the 2010 year or thereafter, who are considered non-remedial students. So again, we have different charts for different populations of TAP recipients. And this particular chart is for a 4-year degree student who's a first-time TAP recipient starting on or after the 2010-11 academic year and who's not considered a remedial student. So for this student, you can see the progression requirements here. And their very first time attending your school, let's say, again, they're right out of high school, they're going to your 4-year college, their freshman term, fall semester, you don't really have to look at this, right? There's no credit requirement. We didn't say, oh, you need to have credits come out of high school, you need to do this. They get their first payment. And no, you do not look at pre-college coursework. Some schools are like, oh, but they got a bunch of pre-college credits, so now they got to move forward in the chart. No, we're looking at when they last received TAP. If the student could have taken 60 credits in high school, they never received TAP, we're looking at their first TAP payment at our school. The requirement is 0 and 0. No GPA, no credits needed. They're good to go. So there's basically these are the easiest students to review are your first time, enrolled students. Now, spring semester, when they're now a second semester student and they're looking to get their second ever TAP payment, now they have to have 6 credits earned from that first term with a 1.5 cumulative GPA. So we're going to look back at their fall grades. We're going to see, okay, did they earn at least 6 credits? And did they have a 1.5 GPA? Now, if they withdrew from all their classes, they have a pursuit issue and they're going to have a SAP issue because they're probably going to have 0 credits and they're going to have a 0 GPA as a result of that. So they won't be in good academic standing, in which case you would decertify them on our system as not being in good academic standing. Now you can see as they progress forward, the amount of credits they need to have earned and the cumulative GPA increases up to the point where when they're beyond 2 years of receiving TAP, they have to maintain a cumulative 2.0 GPA moving forward. Now this pursuit chart is for full-time TAP. When you're reviewing part-time students and you're looking at the GPA requirement, I just want to remind folks, part-time TAP always requires a 2.0 GPA, regardless of where the student is on this SAP chart, if they are a continuing student. The only time a student can get part-time TAP without a 2.0 GPA is if they were a first-time pure, right out of high school freshman, never went to college before. Maybe they're not right out of high school, maybe they're an adult student, but never went to college before, don't have any prior enrollment. They could be a 0 GPA and they can obviously get part-time TAP for that first term, but then every term thereafter, it's a 2.0. So if you're looking at transfer students, you're looking at other students who have college enrollment histories, they need to be a 2.0. If they're getting part-time TAP, regardless of where they are in this SAP chart, that might say, oh, 1.5, 1.8, 2.0 always for part-time TAP. And again, if they're beyond the 2 years of receiving TAP, then they also always need to be a 2.0 based on that requirement. Here's your remedial chart. Now, who's considered remedial? Students who are coming in testing as needing 6 or more credits of remedial coursework, 6 or more credit equivalents of remedial coursework in their first term at your school, or students who are in your opportunity program. They're considered remedial, and no matter what first year they're starting to get TAP for, they're always on this chart. And this would be the chart for students who are first year receiving TAP pre-2010-11. So, those students who are first year 06-07 would be on this chart, regardless of whether or not they're remedial. And you can see there are softer requirements here for the grade point average progression, for the credit progressions. So what happened was basically, a few years back, the state tightened the requirements, but they didn't grandfather these people in. So that's why there's these different charts. So I mentioned this already, how you identify remedial students. Again, they place having to take at least 2 semesters of remedial, or 2 semesters worth of remedial coursework, or 6 or more semester hours of non-credit remedial coursework, or your students who are enrolling in your school's opportunity program. Beneficial placement allows schools some freedom to reposition students on the SAP charts depending on changes in major, being a transfer student, or being readmitted to schools where they previously performed poorly. So beneficial placement is sort of like a professional judgment that you have that allows you to use a repositioning of these students who by payment history might be at a higher level of the chart, but by the amount of credits that they have or what's being transferred in, they should really be at a lower level. So let's look at the chart again to illustrate this. So let's say I'm bringing in a transfer student who went to college for 2 years before. Let's say they went to a 2-year school, an associate's degree, and we don't, you didn't have an articulation agreement or anything, so they didn't bring in all 60 credits. But if you're looking them at the SAP chart, you're going to say, oh, well, you already received 2 years worth of TAP. You should be at the 5th payment. You need to have 39 credits. Let's say you only transferred in 10 credits for them. Of all the 60, you didn't like any of the classes they took, none of them, for whatever reason. This is just a really harsh example. But let's say you're only taking 10 credits. So what we would say, what typically your instinct would say is, oh, 5th payment, you need 39 points, 39 credits. You only transferred in 10, so guess what? You're not in good standing. What we say is use beneficial placement in that example, position them in a place where they can start to receive TAP at your school and then track them moving forward. So if you're only transferring in 10 credits, then I would roll them back to the second position of the SAP chart and say, we're going to start you from here, and your progression is going to be 6, 15, 27, and so on. The only thing you have to keep in mind is because this is a student who previously received 2 years of TAP, while the chart says a 1.5 GPA, you have to pencil in that they have to maintain a 2.0. Because the law requires that if I've gotten 2 years worth of TAP payments and I'm beyond those 2 years, I always must maintain a 2.0 regardless of where you beneficially place me on the SAP chart. Same thing if I change majors. I've been at your school for 2 years. I all of a sudden decide to get out of the nursing program and go into one of the liberal arts program. I lose a lot of credits. You could reposition me on the SAP charts. You readmit me to your school. I flunked out pretty bad. I did 2 semesters at your school 5 years ago. Got 2 payments of TAP. Got a bunch of D's, F's. Really, really bad. Didn't earn a lot of credits. You wouldn't put me at the 3rd position. If you're readmitting me after all those years, you can reposition me to the 1st. Maybe I didn't earn any credits at your school. I got a bunch of F's and, so you have that ability to do that in those cases where students can benefit from being placed in the earlier slot of the SAP chart. So again, I already reiterated this multiple times. If they're beyond 2 years of receiving TAP, then no matter where you beneficially place them, they always must maintain the 2.0 GPA. So you'll have transfer students coming in needing to maintain a 2.0 GPA by way of having previously received 2 or more years worth of TAP. So typically you would see someone with 24 or more TAP points, knowing that they need to be a 2.0. For part-time TAP, again, we have a whole session on part-time TAP, so I'll be brief with this, and we do cover how to evaluate SAP in pursuit for part-time TAP. But if you're looking at students who have partial point progressions, so on a clean SAP chart progression would be in increments of 6, right? So they go 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, so on. But if they've gotten part-time TAP before, or APTS or other part-time awards, then that could give them some kind of fuzzy TAP point totals where you may not be sure where to place them. So what we always say is if they have partial payments and they have partial point accruals, then you always go round down on the SAP chart. You don't progress them forward until they've reached enough points on the SAP chart. So let's say, for example, you have a student who's a first-year freshman right out of high school. You give them part-time TAP for their first semester. They only use 3 points. Let's say you give them a 6-credit part-time TAP award. While you would be looking at them in the spring saying, oh, you're going to be at the 2nd position because this is your 2nd TAP payment, we would say, well, yes, it is their 2nd TAP payment, but they haven't earned enough points to be advanced to the 2nd position of the TAP chart. Because to have advanced to that 2nd position, you need to have used 6 or more points. The students only use 3 points from their first semester, so they're stuck at the 1st position of the SAP chart. So literally, they could have a 0 credit earned, 0 GPA, and be in good academic standing after that 1st semester if they got a 3-credit part-time TAP award and didn't go beyond 6 points of usage to advance to the 2nd position on the chart. So the certification data that we provide you on the rosters and on our certification screens will help you identify where to position students on the chart. Again, in clean cases where the student's always been at your school, they're advancing at your school, it's pretty easy to track them, but you may have less clear cases where you might be doing beneficial placement and maybe first year is critical to putting them on the right chart, but cap points might not be a factor because you've repositioned them to a much earlier part of the chart based on how many credits they've earned. Now, just one last thing on beneficial placement, just because you roll a student all the way back, maybe to the first part of the first position of the SAP chart, doesn't mean they get extra years of TAP payments. They're still under the 48-point cap for a 4-year program, 36-point cap for a 2-year program. So if they're coming in already with a lot of points used, even if you roll them back in the SAP chart, they're going to run out of lifetime eligibility, regardless of where you put them on the SAP chart. So also keep that in mind. So again, use our certification screens as an aid to help you know where to position them. We get questions from schools about students who've lost good academic standing and what their options are to get back in good academic standing. And so the immediate option they would have, so let's say I come to your college right out of high school, I have a bad first semester. I withdraw from all my classes. What I have, these are my options. What I can do is I can go in the spring. You'll decertify my TAP for spring that I'm not in good academic standing. I'm not going to get TAP. I can make up my deficiency. I can have a good semester. I can get my, pursue all 12 credits, get good grades. And then in the following semester, when I come back to school, so maybe the next fall, I'll be back in good academic standing. I can get TAP again, but it won't be retroactive. I can't at the end of the semester say, hey, I passed 12 credits. I got straight A's. Can you retroactively give me my TAP for spring? The answer would be no, but you'll be good coming next fall when you come back. They could also just leave your school for a year or more, and we do it based on academic year. And if they leave within the one full academic year and then you readmit them, then you can place them again using beneficial placement at the beginning of the SAP chart, and they can get TAP again after 1 year of one academic year of not attending your school, and you do readmit them. Or they could transfer to another school. So maybe they're done with you in the fall. They didn't like your school. That's why they did so bad. So now in the spring, they want to transfer maybe to a community college and they want to start all over again. That new school would then start them brand new, regardless of how poorly they performed at the other school. Again, that school would beneficially place them. They have no credits, no GPA. They could beneficially place them at the first position and then start them from there. Those 6 points that they use, though, at the prior institution are never going to go away. So the student would have that point consumption already, on their history, and it could shorten the eligibility that they have moving forward. The last thing they can do is they can say, look, the reason why I had a really bad fall semester was because my mom died, and they had like a special circumstance. In that case, they would have the option to apply for what we call the one-time good academic standing waiver. And it's literally labeled the one-time waiver because students can only get it one time. So I was recently, corresponding with a school, and they were saying, oh, the student said that they can get more than one-time waiver. I'm like, that's counterintuitive. Why would we name it the one-time waiver and say that you can get it more than one time? It's only one time. So, and it's typically for those kind of special circumstances where it's beyond their control. Death of a parent, immediate family member, student got into a car accident, had to withdraw from all their classes due to medical issues, all the sort of things that schools are typically used to when students apply for leave of absence or whatever it is. That can be used to then regain the student's academic standing, and they would then in the spring semester be eligible again moving forward. Waivers cannot be used to usurp the 2.0 prerequisite for part-time TAP. So you can't use the one-time waiver to say, oh, the student had a really bad semester in the fall, wants to get part-time TAP for the spring. You can't use it for that. So it cannot be used to qualify the student for the 2.0. There's a C average waiver, which also cannot be used for part-time TAP, but it's more of a issue where the C waiver is required. So we're talking students who are in the 5th payment term or beyond of TAP, where this 2.0 is required for them moving forward. And that one is one where the C is the only issue, not their pursuit, not their credit progression, just the 2.0. Maybe they're 1.98, 1.95. they're trying, but their grade point average is weighted is not breaking the 2.0 threshold. If they have, again, these special circumstances that have caused them to have that low GPA, they failed a few classes due to death of a parent, then that can be used. One-time waivers do have to be flagged on the HESC site. C waivers are more between you and the student and documented at the school level. So you wouldn't flag on the HESC site that you're using a C waiver. You would flag on the certification screens that you're approving the good academic standing waiver. Good academic standing waivers, C waivers, are all done at the school level. HESC does not know the students' enrollment at your school. We don't know what classes they're taking. We don't know their program. We don't know their grades. We don't know any of the stuff that you would know to make a decision about a waiver. So only schools can make the waivers. And your waivers do need to be known. Your students, it shouldn't be a dirty secret that you can get a TAP waiver. For some schools, they don't want to do them for whatever reason. And so it's like, you literally have to ask 10 people before you find out there's a form or something to apply for a waiver. It should be publicly posted. It should be something that students know that they have a way of getting and applying for. And you should have a procedure in place for reviewing and approving or denying waivers. So just make sure that you have that, because if you don't have a waiver procedures in place, then you're not in compliance, because the law, the regulation requires you to have it in place. Accelerated study. Again, we talk about this in the part-time TAP webinar, but this allows students to receive what's quote unquote called an accelerated TAP award beyond the traditional academic year and beyond the approved annual award that we've given a student. So again, the maximum TAP award, let's say a dependent student with very little income, $56.65 per year divided per term. And the student now wants to go a third semester after that and request another TAP award that would bring them over for the year the maximum amount that we've approved for them. So we would consider that to be an accelerated TAP award. And it could be either a full or part-time or half-time TAP award. Typically, we would see this for schools that have a traditional enrollment calendar where school students start fall, they go spring, then they go summer. Summers are traditionally an accelerated term. But if you have a non-traditional enrollment schedule where you allow students to start their program at any time, you allow them to enroll for summer, you allow them to start their program in fall, you allow them to start their program in spring, then it could be the third consecutive term semester attended. That could be an accelerated term. Schools might have, a trimester-based schedule, then it would be the fourth term in that case. So just be mindful of that. If students are going back to back terms, are we evaluating terms for accelerated study? And the accelerated requirement says that students must have earned 24 credits from the prior 2 semesters that they received TAP for, in order to meet the requirement to get that third consecutive payment. Credits must come from that same college. It can't be transfer credits, and it must come from the same program of study. It must come from the same college, but it could be from a different program of study as long as they were declared in that program of study at the time and they met that requirement that those credits were applicable. This is only if the student was receiving TAP. So again, if the student was not a TAP recipient for the spring and fall semesters at your school, and you let them start their program in the summer, then summer is not an accelerated term in that example. So because there's no accelerated payment being made to the student for that summer. If they didn't enroll in the fall, let's say they were a spring enrolled student, the first time they started college was in spring. Now they want to go summer. Summer is not an accelerated term because it's not a third consecutive accelerated quote unquote payment, because it's just a regular second consecutive semester for that spring start student. So just keep that in mind, because we've noticed that schools have just kind of gotten locked in that every summer we have to evaluate accelerated study. It's the third consecutive term that qualifies a student for a TAP award beyond the typical annual maximum, which may be the summer, but may not be the summer, depending on if you follow a traditional enrollment start schedule. When you certify accelerated study awards, they can only receive a full-time or a half-time, part-time award. So HTPT is used in that case. Students who are not meeting the 24 credit requirement, because let's say they went fall and spring, they got TAP, they failed a bunch of classes, and now they want to use summer to make up those classes, that doesn't meet the requirement for accelerated study. they wouldn't get, you would certify them as 7 does not meet the accelerated study requirements. Also keep in mind, and we haven't gotten some questions about this recently too, duplicative benefits. Is the student receiving a grant, scholarship, or other type of benefit at your school or from someone outside of your school that you've signed off on that covers their tuition and duplicates the purpose of TAP? TAP is a tuition-specific award. It literally stands for the Tuition Assistance Program. So TAP awards do not apply towards fees, towards your college fees or other fees, except for SUNY schools. It's a different story with the college fee, but doesn't go to your technology fee. It doesn't go to your housing charges. TAP doesn't apply to books and transportation. TAP is covering the tuition charges. And if the student has very little tuition charges owed because they're actually getting other programs that are also tuition specific that pay their tuition before TAP, then TAP should either be reduced or decertified. So what's a common example of this? Federal VA benefits. You got a veteran student in Chapter 33, maybe you're a 2-year community college, VA pays 100% of their full-time tuition. That student should not be receiving TAP. Now, if it's only a 50% coverage of tuition and they have 50% tuition liability left after the Chapter 33 VA benefit, then yes, there's room for TAP. If you are one of these medical programs that have partnerships with hospitals and unions, and the medical union or the hospital employer pays or reimburses the tuition in full for your students at the end or middle point of the semester, then no, they shouldn't be receiving TAP, because basically the state then is paying your student for going to college. So any benefits that you're aware of that cover the student's tuition, duplicating the purpose and intent of TAP, should be either reduced on the TAP certification. We have something called other benefits, a field where you would put that, or TAP can just simply be decertified because you know that the student's not going to be eligible to receive it because they got 100% coverage through their job. Their job is going to pay all the tuition. So if you know about the benefit, then you have to make sure that you do this. Now, there may be benefits you don't know about because you didn't sign off on it, you didn't get a form, but a lot of times these employers, these unions do have a form that a college has to sign off on. So if you're signing off on any kind of tuition benefit forms, make sure that you've noted that it might impact TAP. 5-year status, we spoke about this a little bit before, so I'll be short. Again, a 5-year program is an approved 5-year undergraduate degree program. If you have 3+2 undergrad grad degree programs, those are not 5-year programs for TAP. At the point at which a student is a grad student, they're not eligible for TAP because TAP is not awarded to grad students. So if you're charging a student grad tuition, they're fully enrolled in a grad program, should not be getting TAP. So if you have a student in these 3-2 programs, maybe they could get it for their 4th year if you're still charging undergrad tuition for the grad coursework. But if they're at the point where the undergrad part of it is done, you consider them now fully grad, you're charging grad tuition, should not be getting TAP. So again, an approved 5-year program would be something like that architectural undergraduate degree, 150 credits, 5 years of full-time study. That would be something that typically would be approved by SCD. And that would be something that you could award the 5th year for. And then again, if you have those opportunity programs, those are also approved for that additional year. If you are trying to approve a student for an additional year of TAP eligibility, you have to flag their record on HESWeb through both the certification and student record maintenance area to indicate that they're in an approved 5-year or opportunity program. And you can see that highlighted here. So on the top is a certification screen where I'm certifying the student as a 5-year program. And then I'm also going into their student record maintenance. And there's a question, a yes or no, are they enrolled in HEOP, EOP, CD, or are they in an approved 5-year program? And we can put yes for that. And that will enable them to receive the 5th year. So if you have a HEOP student right now whose 5th year is denied by us, you don't have to call us. All you got to do is simply go to their student record maintenance, change that flag from no HEOP to yes HEOP. And when we process that change, they'll be awarded a 5th year. But you want to make sure when you certify them that you're also flagging that they're in a 5th year program. The student record maintenance transaction only needs to be done once for the existing applications. So if you do it now and they haven't applied for next year yet, which they haven't because we haven't opened up the app yet, then that will roll forward. But if they have multiple applications already open, then it's not going to roll forward, because if you did it for 23 and they already had a 24 application approved on our system, then you needed to do it for both 23 and 24. It'll only roll over if an application hasn't been filed yet. All right, so let's talk a little bit about HES Web navigation, certification, and reports to kind of round out this training. So unfortunately, we can't provide much support to schools around systems. A lot of schools use automated systems, through Banner, and Seeker Center provides support for that, and DataTel Colleague, and they have modules that help simplify or automate TAP certification. We don't represent any of those software providers, so we can't provide support with those modules or those systems. So sometimes I'm getting questions in priority services about some errors on your system. I have no idea what they are. But if it's an error on HES Web, then yes, I'll be able to assist you. So just keep that in mind that we're talking here about HES Web and HES systems and platform, not your school's particular financial aid management system or data platform that you use to exchange files with us if you do use a batch process. So most schools are familiar with and have access to our transaction processing HES Web. If you ever get locked out, you could always email priority services. We do password resets. We're kind of one-stop shop for schools. Your view student record screen is typically what you'd be brought to first. You punch in your student ID and you select the school code if you have multiple school codes, and you can see their status with us. We try to lay out as much information on this view student record page as possible. We give you their approval or denial status, missing information status with a message description. We let you know if IVP has been completed, if they're on a roster, where they are, if they've been remitted. So, we kind of give a lot of statuses on here. It's a lot of info. And as you take your time and read it, you'll see a lot of this is, we try to throw as much as we can at schools to help you figure out where they are in our process and where they are in our status. So definitely take a look and explore that, because there's a lot of useful information on there. On the left menu on HES Web, there's a link called Student Record Maintenance. Student Record Maintenance allows you then to make changes against the student's application if you think changes are warranted. Any changes that schools submit, if you want to update, parent info, if you want to update your school code, some changes are processed automatically. Other changes fall into a review queue where HES staff, like myself, have to review and approve your attempted changes for the student. So we see all sorts of wacky things that schools will try to do to student apps, make them fully independent when they're not, make them remove parent info, change parent info. Anything that you do is going to be subject to our audit. So, and if we don't agree with the changes, we just simply won't process them. So I would say if you're going to make full-scale changes to an application, contact us first. Let us know what your intentions are, and then we'll advise what you can do, or we'll make the changes ourselves. But just be mindful that anything you submit on student record maintenance is subject to HESC approval before it's actually processed. So it's not, oh, I submitted it today, it's going to be processed tomorrow. You submitted it today, it's going to land on a review queue tomorrow. We're going to review it, and then we'll either approve it or deny it for processing. When you submit certifications to us, you can either do it individually on HES Web, or you could use, again, your school's financial aid management system and whatever modules are added to that to allow for batch file processing, where you exchange files with us. Again, we have a data exchange team that can support, providing file layouts and formatting and stuff like that. But we really can't provide software support with errors or issues that you're having with your school software. If you're going to certify directly on HES Web, be mindful of the links on the left menu on HES Web: View Submit Pending Certification, View Correct. View Submit is where you would submit pending certifications that haven't been processed yet. If you've already submitted one and you don't see it in View Submit Pending, then it's rolled into the View Correct certification. So as soon as you submit it, as soon as it gets swept off of our system, it'll move out of the pending area and it'll go into the View Correct area. In View Submit Pending, you can query for all your students who are outstanding right now. If I wanted to know at my school how many students for fall 2024 have a pending certification that I need to certify, I can just simply go to the View Submit Pending transaction list, do a query for academic year 24, put the term as fall, hit view, not put anything else, no roster, no student social ID or anything. Hit view, and then I'll see everybody on every roster that hasn't been processed. I really recommend that you do this just to make sure that you're up to date. So especially for our prior year, our prior year 23-24 is still open, and there are several schools that have uncertified awards from 23-24 that during the spring we're going to be canceling. So you want to make sure that you're fully caught up with 23-24 certification. So I highly recommend going to the View Certification Pending list, putting in academic year 23, hitting fall, so put view and see what you have and see who needs to be submitted. Do the same thing for spring 23, 24. Make sure that you're fully cleaned up for the prior year, in addition to the summer 24 and fall 24 terms. In your certification details, when you click into a student, again, we provide you a lot of info on what you need to certify. Give you first year, we give you their TAP points to help you position them in the right chart. So a first year 96 would be a pre-2010 chart, right? Can I certify the student for part-time TAP? Some of you will try, but you can't. And the reason why is because part-time TAP requires first year 06, 07 or after. So if I'm trying to certify a first year 96 student for part-time TAP, you're not going to see the credit options for that. So we covered that in our part-time TAP training. I definitely recommend you watch that if you haven't watched that yet. And while most on those rosters are going to be mostly TAP awards, there could also be some other awards included on those rosters that would be flagged on the roster as other awards. That could be the Scholarship for Academic Excellence. It could be Veterans Tuition Assistance, the STEM Incentive, Part-Time Scholarship. Some of these programs fall right into the same kind of certification procedures as TAP, like Scholarship for Academic Excellence, full-time like TAP. It's not convertible to part-time study unless the student's ADA accommodations for part-time study. VTA could be full or part-time. Same requirements generally as TAP, except it's flexible for full or part-time without prerequisites. The STEM Incentive and Part-Time Scholarship are end-of-term awards. So if you're looking at an online roster and the student has a STEM Incentive Award on there or a PTS, Part-Time Scholarship on there, if you try to certify them now for fall 24, it's going to error because these are end-of-term awards where you're supposed to check at the end of the term, PTS, they maintain a 2.0 cumulative GPA at the end of the term. STEM, same thing, GPA requirement, end of term, earn 12 credits in their STEM program of study. So, these are things that you need to be checking for those particular programs, which is why our system will block you from submitting the certification too early. When you're certifying awards, be mindful of the eligibility codes, the statuses that you indicate, because some will result in a payment, others will result in disqualification. If I use eligible, TAP no scholarship, withdrawn tuition liability, those will result in a payment. When I use TAP no scholarship, that could be for an example where the student is part-time and they have TAP in the SAE. SAE requires full-time study, but they're eligible for part-time TAP. So I would certify them for part-time TAP, but use TAP no scholarship, which would then cancel out their SAE and allow them just to get part-time TAP since they can't get SAE for part-time study. Withdrawn with tuition liability, that would be your student who fully withdraws. You're only going to use it when a student fully withdraws from all their classes. If a student is partially withdrawn, they withdrew from one class, you certify them normally, but of course, in the next semester, you review their SAP and POP requirements to make sure that that withdrawal doesn't put them out of good academic standing. But if they completely withdraw, that does immediately put them out of good academic standing. So we ask that you use 3 withdrawn with tuition liability, and our system will block you from certifying them in the next 2 terms because it knows that the student needs at least 1 year or a waiver in order to be certified within that short time frame. If you use any of the following certification status codes, payment is not going to be issued for the student. So not registered, obviously, they're not at your school, not full-time. Not full-time is not for part-time TAP. So some people are trying to give a student part-time TAP and they use not full-time. For part-time TAP, you simply say eligible, and then for their status, you tell us how many credits they're taking, and that gives them a part-time TAP award. Not full-time will disqualify them. Not matriculated, does not meet accelerated study requirements. We covered that before. Not in good academic standing, we covered that too. And then miscellaneous. Miscellaneous may be used for multiple reasons. For some schools, you have to use miscellaneous for TAP when you need to do something to get Excelsior to pass through. There's different reasons why you use miscellaneous. If we just try to recommend that you put the student in the right decertification status. If you decertify everybody's miscellaneous, when they call us, we're going to refer the student back to you to find out what's the reason why they were disqualified. Somebody's asking a question about, looks like residency. Student was approved for TAP, resident questionnaire was approved. In 22, they filed out of state. This has collected 22. So keep in mind that let's say you're the student, you moved to New York January of 2023. You lived in Texas for all of 2022. Would you have filed a New York State tax return in 2022? No, you would have filed a Texas tax return because you were a Texas resident for all of 2022. So where you filed your 2022 tax return is not a deciding factor of residency, because when you move to New York in 2023, now you'll be filing a New York tax return and you have the 1 year. Your semester fall started September of 2024. If they moved to New York in January of 2023, they've been here over a year and a half. They're a resident. So again, where the 2022 tax return was filed could be helpful in determining a residency decision, but it's not the deciding factor. So if you're reviewing for the 22 return and you see it's, and for you saying APTS, you know, you're saying, oh, there was out of state return, put them through do a residency questionnaire for them. We give you access to print an online blank paper residency questionnaire in the forms area of HESWeb. Have them fill it out, see when they say they started living in New York. Maybe it was after the 22 year, and that's why they filed an out of state return for 22. Somebody's asking, can students file the TAP app for 25-26 prior to the FAFSA being completed? They should wait until after it's processed. We're opening up TAP December 1st, which is when we expect FAFSA to be opened for the general public. We know that FAFSA has been in some beta soft launch kind of deal for the last few weeks. So after certification, we process your certifications every week on Fridays, Thursday nights, for a remittance placement on Friday morning. So if you want to get all your fall students certified this week, do them before Thursday, 5 or 6 p.m., typically 6 p.m. And we'll process it that Thursday evening, and it'll be on a remittance advice that Friday. So that's typically when we process. The remittance advice is basically your certification results. Everybody you certified as eligible who's going to get an award, and everybody who you decertified and said they're not qualified. And this will help you for accounting purposes to match whatever payment you're going to be making to the students, because we'll tell you on here what the actual award amount is going to be based on your certification. Especially for part-time TAP, if you're doing a part-time proration, the remittance advice would then have the final prorated award amount that you're going to be, putting on the student's account. Please, 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 please check for certification errors. So if you've just certified 500 students in a batch file, or even if you spent all night doing it on HESWeb, when we process those that Thursday evening, Friday morning, when you're looking at your remittance advice, you might notice 1 or 2 of those students are not on the RA. And it's likely that they didn't get processed because they had a certification error and they fell into our certification errors queue. So what we simply ask you to do is, after you do any kind of mass certification, or even if you're doing a cleanup, use the View Correct Student Certification area, run a query for errored certification for whatever particular term, and see what's been errored. If you have students on there who you intended to give them TAP, you certify them as 1 eligible, and you see that they errored, then see what the error is and if you can resolve it. And if you need support fixing errors, reach out to us. We've had some odd errors this year that we've been fixing. And Priority Services, our email inbox, we'd be able to help you there. But make sure you're looking at errors, because I had a school the other day say, oh, why didn't I get this fall 23 award? And it's been errored for like a year and a half. And so we just told the school, fix that error. And while you're there, fix all the other errors that you haven't looked at in all this time. So, you'll have errored awards that are decertified as not enrolled, where the student has already changed schools. Those you can't fix. So those will error out because by the time you decertify the student, they had already gone and changed their school code to another school. They're already gone off that roster. So you can ignore those. We're more concerned with you fixing certification errors on HESWeb. So unfortunately, no, there's no, because right now when you do that, so someone's asking if we can provide a spreadsheet method for fixing certification errors like we do for Excelsior. That Excelsior fix process is manual for us. So I'm assuming we'll eventually move to automating Excelsior errors to be in the same manner as fixing TAP errors, which is electronic. So you don't have to do, you may want to check. I know this particular school is probably a banner school. There are certification change correction forms that are automated. So you don't have to do them all manually on HESWeb. There is a way that you could submit them in batch, but I'm just not sure what functionality your school is using and what the module offers to submit certification correction transactions through the batch file process. So that's something that you'd have to explore with CCUS or whoever provides you support with, because yes, you could go through here, you might have 100 errored students and that's a lot of work. So again, I would just say, what can you do in batch processing? Because we do have the certification change process automated that you can submit it electronically. Once the error is fixed, the students still remain on the error report. You'd have to show me an example of that, because typically when you fix one, it gets paid. So it would move from error to process. You might have some odd ones that show a couple times with errors because they've moved to different rosters or some squirrely things can happen. But please send Priority Services an email with one that you certified as fixed and that didn't move to remittance. And then we'll take a look at it with you. All right. And so some customizable reports. Again, we offer a lot of reporting on HESWeb. My favorite one is the payment status report. If I'm doing any kind of cleanup or reconciliation for TAP, I want to look at everybody I certified, everybody who I decertified. Maybe I'm doing a cleanup for part-time TAP. I want to make sure that I didn't incorrectly disqualify all of my part-time students as not full-time when I could have considered them for part-time TAP. I can use the QGP 010 payment status report query for all decertified, not full-time students. And I could do a secondary check, make sure that none of them met the requirements for part-time TAP. Maybe some of them do, and I could give them part-time TAP and not leave them decertified as not full-time. It's a very flexible, useful report. You can get a PDF, you can get an Excel spreadsheet, customize it. So I definitely recommend that. College IDs. Again, we're seeing an increased amount of schools that are forgetting to send us the college IDs for their students, especially some of the smaller schools. Please look at your college ID reports. We have one in the customized reports area where you can pull everybody right now who has an ID or doesn't have an ID and see, you know, it also helps for ID cleanup. Sometimes students will give us a bootleg ID, like your college name, and that's why they're not showing up on your, you know, updating on the status list when we send it to you, because they have a wrong ID on their account. So there's different things that you can use this report for. I definitely recommend it for that. Policies and resources. So we're working on getting TAP Coach back on there, but everything in TAP Coach is in the TAP manual. So policies, procedures, and program manual is there. Somebody asked, where can they find the recorded version of the consolidated scholarship roster processing? Scroll all the way up to the top of your chat window and look at the very first link that I put in at 9:58 a.m. and that's that link. Also remember, some of the policy and the memos that we get come directly from SCD. So make sure that you also have SCD site there. Ability to benefit. We spoke about that. A lot of that is regulated not by HES, by SCD. So I'm punching a link into chat about ATB requirements, testing requirements, question and answers about equivalencies to high school diploma. All of that is laid out cleanly by SCD on their site. So this is definitely a useful link I just put into chat. If you need support beyond today's presentation, please make sure that you reach out to Priority Services. Priority Services is a school use only point of contact. We have our voicemail line, but I really recommend that you just send an email. A lot of what you want to call us about is quicker for me to just write an email back to you and give you the full details of what's going on. So Priority Services, we do password resets. You lock yourself out of your HESC account, you need a password reset, anything that you need, you don't know where to go. The only thing that we really ask is you do not share this with students. We've had a handful of colleges who students want to bypass the appointment system, and now they're giving students Priority Services. So unfortunately, it's slowing down and impeding our ability to give colleges timely service if we now have to answer the new influx of student emails that we're getting to Priority Services, because that address has been leaked out by some schools. So just please make sure that you reach out to Priority Services if you have any questions. So unless somebody has something pressing in chat, we're going to end the session. We're at 2 hours. Again, in the top of the chat, if you scroll to the beginning of the chat bubble, I gave you the link to our training and webinars page on our hes.ny.gov website, where we're going to post a recording of this and a copy of the presentation. It also has all of our prior training webinars that we did over the last 4 to 6 weeks. So please look there. If you're looking for this session, it should be up within the next 24 to 48 hours. Thank you all very much. Take care and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.